The raiding of the Alabama Crimson Tide and Nick Saban's coaching staff continued as today it was announced that Karl Scott, cornerbacks coach for the University of Alabama, looks to make the jump from the college to the NFL and be the cornerbacks coach of the Minnesota Vikings. And we have to talk about why this is simultaneously a very big deal without being something I'd be overly concerned about, which is just truly an incredible juxtaposition to find yourself in, but when you have the greatest college football coach ever, that's the juxtaposition you find yourself in. So we have to get into this, and before we do, as always, y'all know the drill, and especially today because I'm really curious to see what y'all are thinking. So hop down into the comments and give me a Y for yes and an N for no. Do you believe that the loss of Karl Scott is going to have adverse effects for the University of Alabama moving forward? And let me know why, because this is super intriguing to me. Guys, if you're already here, go and subscribe to the channel. As we're on our push to 2,000 subscribers, I'd love to have you along for the journey. I do constant college football content, whether that's player analysis or film reviews, you name it, and we do it, and I'd love to have you along. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like and comment, because likes and comments go a long ways in helping channels like mine get picked up by the YouTube algorithm. But with all that being said, let's talk about why this Karl Scott loss is super interesting for the University of Alabama. And like I said in the intro, this is an incredible juxtaposition to find yourselves in, but it's one that you find yourself in because of who the head coach of the institution is and because of the allure he carries. Karl Scott, rated as the #1 recruiter per 24/7 Sports, looks to make the jump to the NFL. Now, I'm going to get the gloom and doom out of the way first and tell you why it is a big deal, inevitably, that Karl Scott looks to leave the Crimson Tide coaching staff. First, this comes in a year where already the Crimson Tide coaching staff has been raided. Alabama has lost 5 on-field assistants, whether that be offensive coordinator, tight ends coach, special teams coach, offensive line coach, running back coach, and now the cornerbacks coach looks to make a jump. It's one thing just to lose that many highly touted coaches. It's another thing to lose coaches that are that good at their job, a Steve Sarkisian being one of the greatest offensive minds in college football. It's another thing entirely when you lose that many coaches that are that great at their job that are also ranked inside the top 10 recruiters in the nation. I'm talking Karl Scott, Kyle Flood, Jeff Banks, all 3 guys ranked as some of the best recruiters in the nation per 24/7 Sports. So yes, a loss like that inevitably hurts. And so even for the University of Alabama, this is going to be an adjustment period. And look, I'm a big fan of Karl Scott. I'm a Vikings fan, so I'm very happy at the prospect of him coming to be the cornerbacks coach for the Minnesota Vikings because God knows we need it. We're a talented secondary, but didn't show it last year. And when I look at the evolution of the Crimson Tide secondary, I can see where the younger guys have really improved, and especially I look at like a Malachi Moore and a Brian Branch as some of the most impressive displays of true freshmen in a secondary I've seen in a long time, when in a COVID year, Malachi Moore is one of the best corners in the SEC, and he didn't become an early enrollee. He got to campus in the summer and had to learn the Alabama Crimson Tide defense over Zoom. For those of you not aware, the Alabama Crimson Tide have one of the most difficult defenses to learn, up there with like TCU. And when you're a true freshman and you have to learn it over Zoom, God help you. Not only did Malachi Moore do that, he thrived. You know, the Alabama Crimson Tide secondary was very good this year, and they've been trending towards a good direction. And while Karl Scott isn't the only person that deserves credit for that, guys, if you're OGs to this channel, you'll know I've been singing Malachi Moore and Brian Branch's praise since August, since before the season started. I knew that they were eventually going to become the players that they are. I didn't know it happened this quick, and while I knew that that was an inevitability, and so I can't give Karl Scott the lion's share of credit for the development of these guys, he does deserve credit for the development of these guys because he was the cornerback coach. Sure, these guys were incredibly talented, but Karl Scott was able to give them information in a way that was able to help them in a year that needed to be done. Ingenuity is key, especially in a year where there's COVID. But now that we've gotten the gloom and doom out of the way, I want to tell you about why this loss isn't that big of a deal. And it starts at the top, with Nick Saban. Sure, Karl Scott, sure, Jeff Banks, sure, Kyle Flood, some of the best recruiters in the nation ranked by 24/7 Sports. And while they were all great recruiters at their respective institutions before they came to the capstone, it certainly helps when you get to recruit with the brand that is Alabama Crimson Tide football, with the overarching lord of your brand being the greatest college football coach ever. That makes recruiting a lot easier. And so while Karl Scott in particular is a great recruiter, and he was a great recruiter with Texas Tech, securing players that really had offers that were probably better suited outside of Texas Tech, he was still able to pull guys in there because he's able to formulate relationships, which is huge in college. The reason why you can lose a Jeff Banks, the reason why you can lose a Kyle Flood, a Karl Scott, is because you have Nick Saban. And there's a story I want to tell, because it's a story that sticks out in my mind as to why Saban is as successful as he is. Way back before, when Saban was coaching at Michigan State, he went to West Virginia with his wife to go to a Christmas party at his mother-in-law's house. Now, for those of you married or for those of you that have been in a long-term relationship, you'll know what the mother-in-law says, you do if you want any sort of happy marriage. There's no getting out of that, unless you're one Nick Saban, which is why he's different than the rest of us. Nick Saban goes to West Virginia to go to this Christmas party, but on the way, he tells Miss Terry and the mother-in-law he's going to be a little bit late because he wants to go see an old friend. Now, this old friend, he stops by her house, and he ends up staying there all night talking and having drinks with this lady. This lady was Andre Rison's grandmother. Andre Rison was one of the most sought-after recruits in all of the nation, and Michigan State at the time really didn't have any opportunity or a good chance to land Andre Rison. But Nick Saban skipped a Christmas party to sit in Andre Rison's grandmother's room and talk with her to build relationships. You want to know what happened after that? Andre Rison's grandmother told him, "You're going to the University of Alabama because you're going with that man." Nick Saban has an uncanny ability to be able to develop relationships and sell why he and the University of Alabama is the best place for your child. And even with the loss of Karl Scott, even with the loss of Jeff Banks, Kyle Flood, at the end of the day, Nick Saban will do what Nick Saban does, and that is outwork you. It's not just enough for Saban to understand the X's and O's of college football better than everybody else. He's going to outwork you. And nothing in college football was put on more obvious display than in a COVID year where the man doesn't even know how to use email like the rest of college football. Not only does he sign the #1 class in the nation in a year where just a few months prior, the Alabama Crimson Tide recruiting class looked dead in the water, 55th in the nation. We've talked about that. Not only did Nick Saban sign the #1 class, he signed the greatest recruiting class of all time in a year where adaptability was the name of the game. Remember what I've been saying. In COVID, ingenuity is king. And Saban showed everyone why he is and why he will remain the king. As long as Saban is at the helm, these losses, while they hurt, aren't something I'd be overtly concerned about. Because as long as Saban still has that fire, and he has that fire, the University of Alabama will be just fine. But I want to hear from y'all now. Drop down in the comments and let me know what you think. That's it. See ya.